person to do the presentation is actually Thierry de Pauw. He comes from Belgium. Mika, can you give me the next slide so we can see that Thierry's picture? Good. So Thierry is an engineering lead in fintech startup company called Pax Familia. He's also a founder of Thinking Labs, where he works as an advisor in continuous integration and continuous delivery related topics. And Thierry says that he has a passion to help the team to create meaningful software. And Thierry believes strongly that the quality is the secret sauce for the success. Thierry said that to me that he describes himself a bit a shy guy. So I'm really happy that you have stepped out of your comfort zone and join us here in ScanAgile to share your experiences. And Thierry is here to talk about his topic, which is 15 teams, 1 monolith, and 4 months to achieve continuous delivery. So we are actually very anxious to hear how he managed to decrease the time between the releases from half a year to only 2 weeks. And Thierry promised to tell a bit about how they used Improvement Kata and value stream mapping together with the theory of constraints to find out what changes you should actually do first. So this is a true success story, how motivated people can make miracles, even in the continuous delivery integration topic. So Thierry, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Jenny, for the introduction. That's really nice of you.
Yes.
All right.
I can see your slides, so I think we are ready to go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you see my slides? I guess so. Yeah, I don't see the chat. I just see my slides. Right. So let's go. We don't have that much time. 30 minutes. It's quite short for this topic. But well, let's see where we get. So I'm going to tell you the story of 15 teams inside a Belgian federal agency that were all and are still all working on one single central, huge 15 years old monolith. The monolith is very important for the agency because it's the main piece of software that supports the core activities of the agency. It's written in Java using the AGB technology. It's running in a single JBoss application server using one big fat Oracle database. Every team consists of analysts, testers, and developers. And on the side, there were also some transversal support teams involved in this journey. So we had architects, we had DBAs, we had the build and release engineers, and the infrastructure and operations engineers. The agency had somewhere 3 to 4 major releases planned per year. Those major releases were a very big deal. Whenever one came near, stress was rising, all development stopped for a few weeks of code freeze, during which we had rooms full of users and test sessions, making sure the application was working correctly. And yet, after every release, well, there had to be a series of urgent hot fixes, well, to fix production fixes. So in 2017, they had 3 major releases, and while often when releasing is painful, organizations tend to do them less. So in 2018, we only had 2 major releases. Now, inside the agency, there were quite some people that didn't like those major releases. They wanted to get rid of this. One of them were the domain experts. These are the people sitting in between IT and business. They wanted to see features faster in production so that they got feedback faster. So late 2017, a handful of people came together to discuss the matter, and they immediately understood that it wouldn't be that easy and that they needed management support. Luckily, management was quite favorable to the idea, but they needed a clear business case. So they started evaluating how much effort it was to get a major release out. And well, the outcome was quite surprising. So it took them 28 days from code freeze till production deployment. And during those 28 days, they consumed 334 person days. So the case was made, management gave the approval for the project to improve the release process. And so early September 2018, they got in contact with me with the question, can you help us achieve continuous delivery with fortnightly release cycles by the end of December 2018? Well, you can imagine my surprise. Because, well, it gave us less than 4 months to achieve that. And in my humble career, I never saw an organization that big doing the shift to continuous delivery that quickly. Now, the nice thing is that they actually came to me to ask that question. That was fun. So this was going to be my very first experience working with 15 teams. Before that, I had the experience working with 7 teams distributed over Belgium and India. And in the past, I mainly worked with single teams, which is quite simple, quite easy. So I needed a plan. I needed something to handle this. And I didn't want to use maturity models because while maturity models are fundamentally flawed, they assume that improvement is linear, is context-free and repeatable amongst teams and organizations. They define a static level of technological and organizational changes to achieve, and they focus on arriving at a finished mature state. And once you are there, well, you call it done, it's finished. Where we all know that, well, for digital transformations, we should follow a continuous improvement paradigm and focus on capabilities and outcomes. So therefore, I wanted to use the Improvement Kata. At the same time, my friend Steve Smith was finishing his book, Measuring Continuous Delivery, where he explains how an organization can measure the adoption of continuous delivery. And the funny thing was that Steve was actually also playing with the Improvement Kata. And he extended this with theory of constraint applied to the delivery process to identify the bottlenecks and the experiments most likely to succeed. Now, whenever I suggest this way of working to potential customers, well, most of the time I get silence at the other side, and most of the time I never hear back from them because, well, obviously they want a roadmap, and I can't give them a roadmap. But this time was different. I was lucky. My contact was the internal Agile coach who was heavily influenced by Kanban and by lean thinking. And so he really liked this idea of running experiments and having data-driven decisions. So first thing we did was, creating a core team that would represent all the roles involved in the end-to-end delivery process, and that would lead the adoption of continuous delivery. And the reason for that was because I was going to help this organization on my own. So Thinking Labs is just me. So I wasn't going to arrive there with an army of coaches. So it was simply impossible for me to get in touch with all the 15 teams in such a short amount of time. So I was going to interact with this core team, and the core team was going to interact with the 15 teams. And building the core team was pretty simple. The internal Agile coach just sent out an email to the whole organization, to the whole IT organization, inviting everyone with enough motivation, enough interest, and enough background knowledge about the system to participate. And so we started with 20 people, representing the software engineers, the test engineers, the analysts from the various teams. And we also had an architect, we had a build engineer, and we had a release engineer. Unfortunately, we never saw the DBAs, and we also never saw the infrastructure and operations engineers around the table, although there were quite some problems in this area. But well, we managed to just handle that. Now, investing in the practices of continuous delivery is very valuable, and this got confirmed by the academic research done by Dr. Nicole Forsgren and by the book Accelerate, also by Dr. Nicole Forsgren and friends, where she found out that continuous delivery will improve your software delivery process, and together with lean product management and the right organizational culture, it will also improve your whole organizational performance, like really money-wise, turnover. Continuous delivery is this holistic approach to achieving the right speed and the right stability for your IT delivery in order to satisfy market demand. So it's not just about speed as many tend to think, it's also about stability. You really need both. It's a balance. Now, in order to improve stability and speed, well, you need to apply a large number of technological and organizational changes to your organization, and you need to apply this to the unique circumstances and constraints of your organization. And this is what makes continuous delivery so hard and so difficult. So where do you start? Do you start by improving stability, or do you start by improving speed? Do you start by applying organizational changes, or do you start with technological changes? Which change will you do first? Which change will you do next? Which will work, which will not work in your context? So in order to move forward in these uncertain conditions, well, you need something that will help you with this. And this is where the Improvement Kata comes in. So the Improvement Kata is a continuous improvement framework that helps you to execute and to measure organizational change. It's a framework for reaching goals in uncertain conditions, and it was described by Mike Rotter in his book, The Toyota Katas. So it consists of 4 stages that are repeated in cycles. And you start by defining a direction, a vision, a goal that you want to achieve in a far, far future. And then you iterate towards that goal using target conditions with a horizon between 1 week and 3 months. So once the direction is set, well, you start by analyzing your current condition. How does your current process look like? Which data do you have about this process? And then you set your first target condition that gets you closer to your goal. And then, so it's your first improvement that you want to achieve in your first improvement iteration. It has a set date and it has a measurable target, like an acceptance criteria. And then you start executing by running lots and lots of experiments with technological and organizational changes using the PDCA cycle. You plan an experiment, you execute the experiment, you analyze the results, and you compare them with the expected improvement that you were expecting. If it was successful, you incorporate the change into your baseline. If it wasn't successful, you just discard it. So for the agency, the Improvement Kata looked like this. So in order to satisfy business demand, which were the domain experts, well, the agency realized they needed to have fortnightly releases, so that they needed to release every 2 weeks. So they had to go from 2 releases a year to releasing every 2 weeks in order to reach continuous delivery. So the direction was pretty clear. So a last major release would happen by the end of December, and from then on, all releases would happen every fortnight. To analyze the current condition, we would be using value stream mapping. We would map the technology value stream. So technology value stream are all the steps that happen between committing code into version control and getting this code deployed into production and released to the users. Now, for the value stream mapping, we were going to use sticky notes, because sticky notes are far more fluid than drawings. You can rearrange them easily, you can move them around, and so you can iterate very easily over your value stream map. And we were going to do that in group with everyone involved in the end-to-end release process. So when you do this in a group, well, what happens? Well, it starts messy, and then it gets messier, and then it gets really, really, really messy. But as people are refining the value stream map, they are building on top of the knowledge of each other. And in the end, you get a whole value stream map that integrates the knowledge that everyone has about the whole end-to-end release process. And so we got this value stream map for the major release that takes 6 months. So during 5 months, they were accumulating features. Then they had a 3 weeks code freeze, during which you had rooms full of users in test sessions. This is also where the consumption of the 334-person day started. Then we had a 1 week production deployment, and then, well, the whole process finalized with obviously champagne. So, yeah, so if you just have spent 6 months to get something into production, well, you might as well celebrate, do you? But it also revealed a second value stream, a much faster batch release process that was designed for production fixes, and that was happening every fortnight. Look at that. and that occasionally, but increasingly, was also used to release new functionality. And this is a common pattern, well, or should I say anti-pattern, in organizations. So when the transaction cost to get a feature into production is too high, often a truncated value stream will emerge for production fixes, resulting in a dual value stream. So you have a feature value stream with a lead time of months, and you have a fixed value stream with a lead time of weeks. So although this is an anti-pattern, well, this was quite key for the success of this journey, because the patch release process revealed the potential the agency had to adopt continuous delivery. And from then on, well, we only focused on this patch release process, and we never looked again at this major release process. Now, some people got confused by this decision. Why aren't we working in reducing the lead time of the major release? Well, I explained them, well, look, you are already doing this. You are already doing fortnightly releases, but you are doing this under the radar. Management doesn't know that, nobody sees this. Now we are going to make this thing visible, and we are going to make this thing as robust as possible in order to replace this major release process. Now, in order to identify our first improvement target, well, we were going to apply theory of constraints to this patch release process. So theory of constraints is a management paradigm introduced by Eliyahu Goldratt in his 1984 book, The Goal. And the central premise of theory of constraints is that every system has a bottleneck, or has one or more bottlenecks. And spending time optimizing anything other than this bottleneck is just an illusion. So if you have a system that consists of steps A, B, and C, and if B is your bottleneck, well, losing an hour on B is an hour lost for your whole system. But gaining an hour on A and C is just an illusion. So if you increase throughput on A, you will only increase inventory in front of B. And increasing throughput on C will only result in more work starvation for C. Now, we can apply theory of constraints to the technology value stream because it should be a homogeneous process with where every step is as deterministic as possible, just like that is in manufacturing. So now, by applying theory of constraints to our patch release process, well, we were going to identify the bottleneck and identify the experiments most likely to succeed. And so where is the bottleneck? Well, interestingly, the bottleneck was not, so I forgot to say something. So in order to identify the bottleneck, I've asked everyone in the room to pick a green sticky note and to estimate the duration of every activity. And also to pick a red sticky note and to estimate the failure rate of every activity. Now, so it didn't have to be very precise, we just wanted to have an idea. Now, interestingly, we discovered that the bottleneck wasn't manual testing and manual regression testing as everyone would expect. No, it wasn't. It was actually the execution of the automated tests. But wait, the automated test only took 1 to 4 hours to execute, and the manual tests were taking like half a day to a day to execute. But yeah, the failure rate of the automated test was very high, and so it led to a lot of rework and re-execution of those tests, which was adding to the total lead time. And in addition, every lane that you see represents a version control branch, and so on each merge of the branch, well, they had to re-execute the automated test, again, adding to the whole end-to-end lead time. So the bottleneck was identified. Now, in the past, automated tests were executed ad hoc inside the team. So every team has its own sets of tests. And so no one in the organization had a complete overview on the amount of tests that existed and how stable those tests were. So I suggested, in order to increase feasibility, to set up a deployment pipeline. So a deployment pipeline is the automated manifestation of getting software out of version control and deploying it into production. And the purpose of this pipeline is to make the whole process very visible in order to increase feedback and in order to increase the empowerment of the teams. So Now, all tests from all the teams would be executed sequentially, and we would finally get an overview of all the existing tests. I also suggested to collect metrics about the lead time and about the failure rate of this pipeline. And so we found out that to execute all the tests, we got a lead time of 8 hours, and that the failure rate was like 70%. Which was enormously high. And the reason for this high failure rate was quite diverse. So first of all, automated tests were sitting in a separate version control repository from the production code, resulting in tests being out of sync with production code. The concept of one failing test fails the release candidate was totally new to the organization. Up until then, well, the organization had the habit of analyzing failing tests, and if the failure was caused by a recent change to the production code, well, they just well, then the test would fail. But if it wasn't caused by a recent change to the production code, well, then they would say, well, we accept the release candidate. Test data wasn't always cleaned in the database. Manual testing and automated testing were happening in the same environment using the same test data, where we had obviously that these tests were going to influence each other. So quite a lot of reasons. So we got this current condition where we had, well, two value streams. We had a fixed value stream and a feature value stream. The failure rate for the fixed value stream was 70%, and the lead time for the fixed value stream was 8 hours. Okay, so as a first improvement target, the core team decided it would be one of stability improvement. They wanted to reduce the failure rate to 30% within 1 month. Now, because the lead time of this pipeline was 8 hours, they only could execute this pipeline once every night. So this meant that they accepted that 2 out of 5 pipeline runs would fail. And then they defined experiments that they wanted to execute. So first was establish a deployment pipeline. That was done, check. They wanted to introduce a daily evaluation of failing tests. They wanted to set up a dedicated environment for the automated test. They wanted to recreate the database before running automated tests, so to make sure that test data got cleaned up before running the tests. They wanted to stop third-party services because lots of tests were depending on third-party services, and well, obviously when those third-party services weren't up, while the test failed. And they wanted to automatically collect lead time and failure rate of the pipeline so that they could create dashboards and see the evolution of those metrics over time as and see if some experiments would have a positive impact or a negative impact. Now, that was for the plan. Obviously, the execution was a bit different. And it's only afterwards, like really 6 months later after this mission, I realized, well, it was in fact an example of fear conversations that helped us mitigate fear and navigate the difficult conversations we had to have in order to improve this release process. And so the first fear was one of complexity. So when I started, it was September. The major release cycle already started since June. So during 2 months, they had the time to accumulate new features. Now, I was hoping we could gradually and incrementally move the existing features that already were developed and planned for this next major release towards the new fortnightly release process. And so that we could avoid the last major release process, and so that we could avoid a big bang switch between this major release process and this fortnightly release process, because, well, I thought this would be too many risks to handle. Now, it took me some time to realize this was actually not possible. The reason for this was, well, they were using a quite complex branching strategy. So they were using, well, something that resembles Git flow. So they had feature branches that were lasting for weeks or months. They had a long-running develop branch, and they had a semi-long-running master branch. Whenever a patch release happened, they were cherry-picking planned fixes and features from their develop branch into the master branch. Now, this resulted in master deviating more and more from develop and making it near impossible to merge develop back into master when a major release happened. And so when a major release happened, they had to delete master, deploy from develop, and recreate master. Well, yeah, insane situation. So with a big sigh, we agreed to mitigate this complexity just by keeping this last major release in December as planned, but we would make sure the patch release process would be as robust as possible, and we would also introduce a proper Git flow branching strategy, although I'm not a big fan of it, but well, in this context, this was quite acceptable. And we would work on reducing the life cycle of the feature branches, like reducing to, well, a couple of days would be already a huge improvement. And I wanted them to work on moving within 6 months towards somewhere GitHub flow, where the develop branch just disappears. Far simpler. Now, meanwhile, lead time reduced from 8 hours to 4 hours, which was an impressive reduction, because all of a sudden they could execute the pipeline twice a day, which was a 100% increase in feedback. Number of executed tests increased, not because teams were frantically adding new tests. No. They just discovered that there were tests missing in the pipeline. Like, oh, look, we have here another bunch of 100 tests that we forgot. Let's add them to the pipeline. However, stability didn't improve. We had to wait till somewhere late November to have our very first green pipeline where all tests passed green. It was the very first time. And then, well, the pipeline went red for another 2 weeks. So not very reassuring as a situation. And this brings us to the next fear of deadlines. Now, because the agency is part of Belgian government, well, it had legally mandated deadlines, and missing a deadline was just not an option. So how would they be able to hit these hard targets, knowing that a single test failure could block a release? And given the stability of the automated test, well, it was quite acceptable concern that IT management had. So to mitigate this, the core team suggested, well, let's introduce a manual overrule in the pipeline. So despite a failing pipeline near a hard deadline, the team could choose to just accept a bad release candidate and mitigate risk with additional manual testing. Now, personally, I wasn't very happy with that decision because I feared it would remove the pressure to actually do something about the stability of the tests. And that fear got confirmed because in August 2019, they were still struggling to get this pipeline stable. Now, on the other hand, it had the benefit of making the overrules very visible, because overrules happened in the past, but nobody was aware of it. Now we were going to record it, and we would be able to radiate this and radiate the problems that goes with it. The last fear was one of bugs. And that was the biggest concern of IT management. A severe enough issue would land the agency on the front pages of every Belgian newspaper and damage their reputation. And again, seeing the state of the automated test, it was a well-founded fear. So many of the tests were flaky and non-deterministic. Rerunning the test in isolation, most of the time got them passed to green. So my suggestion was, well, look, flaky tests have no value, just delete them. They weren't too happy with that suggestion. And hindsight, I have to admit, they came up with a better mitigation. So the QA experts suggested, well, let's split the tests in 2 sets. We have a set of stable tests. They run during the day. Whenever a test fails, it blocks the release candidate. And we have a set of unstable quarantine tests. They only run at night. They only give us some information, but it will never block a release candidate. Now, interestingly, and this I was expecting, it also reduced the lead time of the whole pipeline. So from 4 hours, it went to 2 hours. And so they could run now the pipeline 4 times a day. Again, a huge acceleration in feedback. It was fantastic. So the last major release happened in December, as planned, without major issues, which reassured IT management to continue with the plan. The first fortnightly release was planned for the third week of January, and everyone was holding his breath and expecting a storm of problems. And in fact, it happened very smoothly, without any major problems. Well, some problems arise, but nothing really very big. It got fixed like very easily. So it really felt like a very normal patch release process, although the underlying process had completely changed. And from then on, a release came out every fortnight, like clockwork, and it never stopped. And on my first visit, I saw smiles all over the place. Everyone was super excited. Nobody had actually imagined that such a change was possible in that organization. Now, during the journey, I many times was wondering, like, what am I actually doing here? It's going nowhere. It's not going as fast as I was expecting. Experiments didn't get implemented. Stability didn't improve, and yet it happened. Absolutely not as I was expecting it. And the main reasons it was a success is that, well, the core team was a very, very yelled team, very motivated, that absolutely wanted to achieve this. The internal Agile coach spent quite a lot of time to create a safe environment. The core team communicated quite a lot with the whole IT organization, informing them of what was going to happen, which decisions they took. The very short deadline created a very high sense of urgency. An adoption of a continuous improvement paradigm really helped, and the team also took the inertia of the organization at their advantage. They just acted and decided faster than the opposition. The outcome for the agency was the creation of transparency. Now the whole end-to-end release process created visibility. Everyone could see what was happening. And once dashboards were in place about evolution of lead time and stability, IT management got more and more interested in what was happening, which enabled investing in more technical coaching to support the teams and to improve them further. This whole journey only took 12 days of my time. It started with a 2 days kickoff, and then I went 1 day every week as follow-up, where I did facilitation. I only gave guidance and teaching principles and concepts. All the hard work, all the improvement work was done by the agency. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Thierry, about your presentation. That was truly interesting. I think my company would use that kind of things also. Okay, next we
voice. So we have a couple of questions in Q&A. So one of the questions is, how can a Scrum Master support growing continuous integration, continuous delivery best practices within software development teams? What would specifically they should pay attention to?
All right. Oh, that's a hard one. I'm currently in the same situation with the startup. So, well, first of all, make sure you have actually tests. That's the first step. Eventually, you don't absolutely need a central build server. I'm many times I'm hammering in the team, like they are like praying for, oh, we need the Jenkins, we need a Jenkins. No, you don't need the Jenkins. You just need to run the test before you commit. And if they fail, well, you don't commit. It's as simple as that. So just starting with that. So start simple. Also look at your context. What is blocking you from doing continuous integration? What is it? Is it writing tests? Does your team don't know how to write tests? Well, yeah, bring in some coaching, do some pair programming with people that know how to do that, because most of the time people just don't know how to start. I also, well, like years, well, back in the days, I remember, yeah, test-driven development. I absolutely didn't know how to start with that until I went to a code retreat. then I was like, oh, it's that. So pair programming, coaching really helps. Most of the time when I do this, people are like, oh, wow. And off they go.
Very good. So Jenny.
The next question is from Evelina. Sounds like the organization and teams were really committed and had a permission to put time on this topic. How did you manage to get the permission?
Yeah, I did nothing. So I had very little contact with IT management, as it often goes. Like, so you get the stamp technical, so not interesting for management. So I had very little contact with them, but they do got the permission. Well, in fact, this whole thing was done on training budget. This is just internal budgeting, blah blah blah. But yeah, they had too much training budget, so they did that on training budget. They got the time to do this. The internal agile coach was also really good in managing IT management. Like, he calls himself a bullshit generator. So it just worked. He did a great job. I really was most of the time just in contact with the core team. From time to time, IT management came to a presentation and they asked questions, and then I'll try to reassure them. But well, the success of this was really an enabler for more tech coaching, not by myself, but by a colleague of myself who had more time to do this, because I was already busy with the startup, so I could only give 1 day a week, which is in fact was one of the main drivers also for the success, was that I was only there 1 day a week, so everyone had to be there, otherwise they would miss me.
Okay, good, thank you. Hey, we do have still time left for questions. So if you want to ask something, you can also utilize the raise your hand button, and you can ask directly from Thierry. Okay, not yet any questions. Can I ask you something? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
How did you decide to utilize this Improvement Kata and value stream mapping as a tools?
Well, it was already a couple of years I had that on my radar, like, I should use this. And a year before that, I was part of a scaled agile transformation in a bank here in Belgium. And I also wanted to be part of this scaled agile transformation because I wanted to see how this works, a scaled agile transformation. Well, it was a real disappointment because, well, I just left because I disagreed with the way they did it. And one of the things they did was actually maturity models. I remember we discussed with the tech coaches, like, what would be stage 1? Should we add testing or not in stage 1? What should be stage 2? And you were like, don't know. And there I got the confirmation, this Improvement Kata would really be something. And I remember I said in the beginning of that year, it was at a Lean Coffee meetup. One of the coaches that was present said, like, what would be the thing you would like to try this year? And I was like, I want to do the Improvement Kata. And there I had the perfect case to do it. And I never did it before. It was really a jump again out of my comfort zone. I would really like to do it again, but I really advise it to do it as a pair, like being 2 coaches to do this, because as one person, it's quite asks lots of you, because you're facilitating, you're taking notes, you're trying to keep everything in your head, because you're like, this is going to be a great presentation, but you need to keep all this information. So being with 2 persons would be a better option. And value stream mapping, yeah, well, that I knew already from Lean Enterprise, from the DevOps handbook, where they also speak about it, and the whole Lean community. Well, it's like the standard thing you should do.
Okay, interesting. Hey, thank you very, very much about your presentation. It was inspiring, and I think too. And okay, next we do have in our agenda, we do have a break. Good. Remember to jump up, do a little exercises, and grab a bit of coffee, and we'll come back at 5 to 4 to continue with the last presentation. Okay, thank you.